This is Guy McPherson, the Nature Bat's Last channel. Yet another time for another conversation with psychologist Peter Miller. Peter has a couple of things to mention that I think will start us off nicely. So, Peter, why don't you take the show for us a few minutes?
Okay. Well, I mean, like we've been talking about the systems and institutions and the way that we have to try and negotiate our lives with those, the types of thoughts and beliefs that we're indoctrinated into without even knowing it early in our lives. I think we have a really nice kind of expansion discussion concept for that today that we're going to explore. And of course, I like to mention that my course is available for mental health, the free BPD course at freebpdcourse.com. And it is specifically designed for people struggling with borderline personality disorder, although I think it's fair to say that anyone would benefit from learning from what's in there, because there's pretty good chance that you know somebody who is dealing with something along those lines. It's actually quite a common condition. And the more everybody's informed about how mental health issues happen, the more peaceful and civil we can be about dealing with those things, the more compassionate we can be. I mean, the more you know about mental health, basically, the more compassionate you can become with people and with yourself, most importantly. So do check it out.
Can I interject right there?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard from several people via email that they have begun taking the course and they think it's been very helpful. And each of them thought that they were normal, whatever that means in this set of living arrangements, that they were getting along fine with their lives and they didn't have any particular psychological or emotional issues. And then they started taking the course and they realized, hey, this is helpful.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's possible to actually grow up in this culture and be to understand mental health in a way where you can actually be doing it where you're helping your body and your mind. I think we're actually set up to go the other way and not even know it. We're set up to kind of turn on ourselves and which means like to judge ourselves incessantly, and which is connected with a lot of cultural aspects as well. So learning about the course is kind of like a way, it is a type of defiance, which I think is cool, because the more you understand what's actually happening and how people get sick, how it happens in a cultural context, and how common it is, the more you can kind of rebel, and rebelling means to be like healthy in mind and body. So, I mean, if you like the idea of being a rebel, which I just dig it in my whole life. So, and I think me and Guy share that in common. So,
well, in fact, I should mention here the definition of a radical, somebody
mm-hmm.
who gets to the root. We usually think of a radical as somebody who throws Molotov cocktails to get attention and try to burn down the system or whatever. But no, a radical is just somebody who gets to the root. That's why a radish, the name of the radish is radicans, the Latin name.
Yeah,
for radical, for getting to the root, because it's all root.
It's kind of funny when you're a therapist and you work in a clinic, and I've said this before, like we sit around and have little powwows like everybody does, right? Probably at their clinics. And we ask, like, why is there so much traffic? Like, why is everybody so sick? Like, why does it never stop? Like, and you just like, what? And you just start thinking and pondering. And
so it might be the exponential growth of humanity. That might have something to do with it.
That too. I mean, but if you have to wonder, does everything that society says about mental health, all the little things, all the little mental health days, the suicide awareness days, all the thousands of clinics and millions of practitioners, online courses, everything, like all that's going on, but people are still sick. Like, what gives,
That the entire system is something that most of us are not, we just don't have the capacity to deal with it, much less rebel against it.
Mm-hmm. Well, if it is to be a rebellion, it won't be a big one, I'll tell you that. But
right. There's just pretty bad film with a great concept. I think I've mentioned it before, 1988. They Live, starring Roddy Piper. And he finds this pair of glasses, and he's able to look at the billboards, which say, they're advertising whatever product. And with these glasses on, they say, obey, or buy, purchase, That's the whole set of living arrangements. It doesn't really matter what's being sold on the billboard or on the marquee. What's really being sold is a set of living arrangements that has turned us all into consumers instead of citizens.
Yeah. And if you're in a paradigm like that, which is basically, I would call it a self, or a health neglect paradigm. You serve the system, you ignore yourself, right? Basically, you ignore your health. You might go after things that you want, but the parts of your mind and body that need proper attention and care get ignored. So, and that turns eventually into a self-destruct process. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We serve the system. If we don't serve the system, we get called out for not serving the system. You're a weirdo. You don't fit in. There's something wrong with you. You have oppositional defiance disorder, or any number of other things, right?
Yeah.
Called.
You're a disappointment, actually, I think, is what you are if you don't conform enough. Yeah.
I was called an eco-terrorist and a radical, the latter of which I am, by senior members of the Obama administration, secretaries of the Obama administration. And why? I'm not an eco-terrorist. As a conservation biologist, I probably love the natural world more than the next few thousand people. And I'm a radical because that means I get to the root. And because I just don't fit in, then let the name calling begin.
Which is a perfect, probably, segue into your story you were going to share there about.
Yes,
we were going to talk about the religions of life, shall we say?
Yes, absolutely. They're really important religions. So I turned to my Merriam-Webster online dictionary yet again for definitions. And in this case, I'm looking for the definition of religious. Number one definition, relating to or manifesting faithful devotion to an acknowledged ultimate reality or deity. And the examples, a religious person or religious attitudes. I think industrial civilization, and specifically capitalism, fit that definition as well or better than Catholicism, for example. And people think of Catholicism as being pretty serious stuff. Definition number two, of relating to or devoted to religious beliefs or observances. The example, joined a religious order. When you're born into the set of living arrangements, you join a religious order. And that religion is capitalism or industrial civilization. They seem to be fairly synonymous to me. And definition number three, scrupulously and conscientiously faithful. If you're not faithful to this set of living arrangements, you are really bizarre. There is something serious wrong with you. Let me give an example, a personal example. I was with my ex for more than 35 years. She was a Catholic. She went to Mass every week. She probably still does go to Mass every week. I'm an agnostic in my professional life. I'm an anti-theist, or at least an atheist in my personal life. But I try not to mix the two because there are some things that science cannot know, or at least cannot know yet. In any event, it was all fine. It's all fine. We had these very different beliefs when it came to what most people would consider religion. But then I realized it was industrial civilization, and specifically the monetary system, and specifically the desire by every single person to have more and more money, and the privilege that brings with it. I could only do one thing. When I realized that it was the monetary system that was driving us to extinction, I had to jump out of the monetary system. That turned out to be exceptionally painful. But when I did, almost immediately thereafter, she abandoned me, she betrayed me, and then she divorced me. And we had what most people would consider religious beliefs at opposite ends of the spectrum. and we got along great for more than 30 years. But then I make this change in my life, and I'm no longer the same person. I obviously was still the same person.
Mm.
And so
Different
that's,
mindset though. Yeah.
yes, and I think that's an example of this set of living arrangements, what do you want, whether you want to call it capitalism or industrial civilization or whatever, as being as powerful or more powerful than even religions, the one including Catholicism, which is pretty powerful stuff.
Did she say the any of the motivations behind her behavior, like a loss of privilege or anything that would lead to the betrayals and the leaving and so on?
Well, the trigger point was, so this was 2006, 2000, well, it was actually before that. It was about 2003 that I realized what was happening with the world. And then we had an agreement that if one of a few criteria was met, then we would start living off grid. And one of those criteria was one of our banks failed. We had money in 3 different banks, a small local bank and 2 large banks. I'm not going to mention their names because this is not an opportunity for advertising. And one of the banks failed. So the bank failed. And within a month, I was living off grid at the place that I had been preparing for a while. And about 3.5 years later, she realized that we had grown so far apart, living 3.5 hours drive apart, and almost never seeing each other during that 3.5 years. She realized that this wasn't working very well. So she tried to play catch up. That didn't work very well. Because 3.5 years at 3.5 hours drive apart is a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it just didn't work out after that. And there's probably 1,000 reasons, and at least half of them my fault as well. But what I'm trying to do here is illustrate this example that had us deciding to live very differently. And we had reached that conclusion when it came to spiritual issues, to what most people would consider religious beliefs, many, many years ago. In fact, I can remember we were, when you get married in the Catholic Church, at least this used to be the case, I suspect it still is, you have to go to this workshop. So I rode the Greyhound bus for ever, or so it seemed. Never a pleasant experience. And we went to this workshop for 2.5 days, and they open with mass, right? So they have this mass, and that's late afternoon or evening, and then you mingle with all the people and blah blah blah, and the formal events start the next day. So the first session we were in the next day with another half a dozen couples, first thing they asked was, how many mixed marriages, how many mixed couples do we have here? And I'm looking around, and everybody's as white as I am. What do you mean mixed? And so I start to make a little noise about this, and my ex shushes me, of course, and she says, one of us is Catholic and the other is not, so we're mixed. And I go, what? And it's funny because I'd seen all those people participate in the final event of mass, which is to take the piece of toast and the wine, right? And they all did that. You're not supposed to do that if you're not Catholic. So I didn't do that. My ex told me, you can't do this. And I saw all those people that were in this little group go up there and take the toast. And I'm like, what the hell? What the hell? How come they're not going to hell? They took the toast. They drank the wine. So it made for a funny story.
Yeah.
For
It's
35
interesting.
years.
So it created, when you decided to pull away from the system and live off grid, it created more distance between the two of you physically, because you were out creating a homestead, right? And
yes, I was in rural southwestern New Mexico, very rural.
Right. Okay. And so yeah, she just wasn't going to go along with that part of it. She didn't want to go out there.
Right, but but I'd been creating this homestead for 3 years already, and when one of these criteria was met, we were going to make the big jump.
Right.
And so in 2008, when it looked like the whole system was falling apart, one of those criteria was met. One of the banks we had money in, one of the three banks we had money in, failed.
Right.
And so I said, this is it. This is an indication that the system is critical, right? It's time to put the paddles on the chest of the civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I opted out, and it was as if till death do we part meant the death of my income.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you sort of defied the system religion, the capitalist industrial religion, to such an extent, I guess, that it was too uncomfortable for her to stay with you in that zone, right? And
right, and not make money. As a full
money.
professor, I was making pretty good money, and there's a lot of privilege associated with being a professor that is in addition to the money, right?
Right.
The interactions you have with other reasonably intelligent people, blah blah blah, getting to go to these professional meetings on a regular basis. So there's all these cool things associated with being a professor, and we weren't doing that anymore.
You were essentially you were creating a more challenging life, maybe a more laborious life.
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding? I was out milking goats twice a day, starting in the early morning, going till late. I was hammering away. I was building all these structures, right?
Yeah.
It was physically hard work. I was very ill-suited for this based on my life as a scholar since basically I was 20 years old.
Very difficult adaptation. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So she didn't want to go through that
well,
experience, I guess, maybe.
She was raised on a farm. She knew that it was laborious and not particularly revered in this society. So she didn't want to do that again. She grew up that way and escaped. Right. She escaped into civilization.
and the comforts that go with it.
And then I wanted to escape out of civilization.
Right. And it's interesting because, I mean, yeah, and you have a whole story of doing that and then sort of returning to civilization.
Right. And the reason for that, just for clarity, because I'm accused every day of being what's the word? A hypocritical idiot, right? Because I opted out of civilization and now I'm back in. Well, I learned a couple of things. One, I learned about the aerosol masking effect, which indicates that if we reduce industrial activity, not by a lot, by some, we don't know exactly how much, that will cause increased heating of the planet, because there are these aerosols up in the stratosphere and they fall out after about 5 days. There was abundant evidence indicated during the pandemic, but it was all regional, starting in the area around Wuhan, China, moving to the Middle East and Northern Africa, then to the Northeast United States and Western Europe, but it was all regional. And there were profound temperature increases and precipitation increases coinciding with COVID. So that makes sense. I didn't know about that. And, that's on me because I was ignorant and I made this ignorant decision. And then the second thing, and there was no evidence to support this idea until much after, no peer-reviewed papers indicating that when some of the nuclear power plants melt down, when some of those nuclear facilities melt down, the ionizing radiation will strip away stratospheric ozone and superheat the planet much faster than what we're doing now. So really, we have to maintain industrial civilization. We have to maintain this set of living arrangements, if only to make sure that those nuclear power plants don't melt down, because if they do, and this is interesting, this was demonstrated quite subtly in the 2021 film Finch with Tom Hanks. And they never said that's what was going on. But if then it was pretty obvious, because people would stick their hand out in the sun and it would just fry almost immediately. and the nuclear power plants were and had melted down. That was one of the parts of the story. So they never linked the two with the science. You know, I would have loved to see some closed captioning going across the stream. He's got serious sunburn all of a sudden because of blah blah blah, right? That would have been great. But so the writers of this 2021 film, Finch, had this figured out, probably based on the peer-reviewed literature that came out starting in, what was it, 2016 or 2017. Anyway, and so they knew, and yet every time I talk about it with somebody, they respond with, "Oh, no, you mean nuclear cooling."
Right.
Because that's the line we've all been fed since the 1970s, but it goes the other way.
Right. So it doesn't really matter if you go off grid or if you stay in civilization. I mean, the path we're on is the path we're on, right? With how things have turned, how things have unfolded.
Absolutely.
And the consequences won't change.
You know, had I known about those two phenomena, I never would have moved off grid. I thought I was setting an example by opting out of this system that was driving us to extinction. And it still is, by the way, but opting out of the system is not a good way to go. And I was a reasonably successful professor. I figured that a bunch of people might follow my lead. And it's a very good thing they didn't. And to my knowledge, only one couple followed my lead. And I can't imagine they're living that way now. And they ultimately joined the defamation campaign against me and saying horrible things, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it was one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time.
And that's what humans do, right? We go on the best information we have at the time with what makes the most sense, I guess, right?
Right.
The facts as they seem to be.
And it made perfect sense at the time, given the knowledge that I had. And it turned out to be a pretty terrible mistake, but mistakes have been made.
Understandable. I mean, yeah, just given where your thinking was at the time and with the just how you understood the whole subject matter, I guess, right? And yeah. So yeah, in a way, so it's probably important to highlight that it doesn't matter how you live your life exactly at this point. Like, if you're trying to be like a total carbon-free person, it's not going to change the long-term outcome because of the way things have been set up with the system and maintained, and the way nature has been abused since humans have been doing that.
Right. And that's an excellent point, actually, and something that we really do need to highlight is two things. One, don't follow my lead, or that of anybody who might be misinformed and you just don't know. So before you make important life-altering decisions, give it serious thought, study the issue, and make sure that this is what you want to do. Don't do anything because you think you have to remain committed to a deity or a set of living arrangements or family or whatever, right? Because we now know about aerosol masking. We know the negative effects of nuclear power plants melting down. So yes, this set of living arrangements is truly horrible in many ways. There's no doubt about that, right? We continue to promote the ideas of racism and misogyny as if they're good. And every civilization has been plagued by misogyny and racism. And those are not good things, but we can work within the set of living arrangements, probably only at the level of family or community, to try to overcome those disasters in the near term. But other than that, live your life with integrity. I just don't see any serious alternatives at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we can escape the paradox, or many paradoxes, as there are. Like, as we live our lives, we can do beneficial things, but also we continue to do harmful things. Like, as we stay living in this set of living arrangements, because I was telling you, it's all I've ever known, and I think it would probably take me 20 years to learn how to be an outdoorsman if I was. And I don't even, you'd have to be pretty strong to do that, I think, and just skilled in a whole different way, you know. But anyway, so as I'm living in this set of living arrangements, and we have these discussions, and I'm sharing my course, and we're trying to offer other insights so people can be, at peace and settled as we all go through this. So we're being helpful, but at the same time, I'm using a computer. I drive a car. I still abuse the environment as far as I know. I guess,
yes, absolutely. And what I'm trying to say is we can't, at some level, we can't turn off the switch. If we turn off the switch of industrial civilization, as some groups want you to do, right? Deep green resistance and idle no more, they either are ignorant, and that's not the case, I guarantee it, or they're so committed to their own form of religion that they cannot use facts to set a new course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the knowledge I had, I made this important decision that changed my life and my relationships with many, many people. And I realized later that was a mistake, but there's no undoing it, right? Once you live your life a certain way, you make these changes, you take these turns, there's no going back. So you can seek forgiveness, you can start living a more appropriate way, whatever, but it is what it is. I made those decisions. We've all made decisions in our lives that we wish we hadn't made in retrospect. If you haven't done that, I would argue you haven't lived a life at all.
You know, I think I just mentioned this in a previous video, but I've been watching these kids in the Congo, and they dig up this cobalt, right? And there's thousands of illegal mining mines or whatever, and these like kids 10 or 11 years old are being they're slaves in these camps, and they work for 12 or 14-hour days or whatever. They have no gear. Their families or whatever, the group they're in for the mining, they abuse the crap out of them, right? If they don't fall into line and continue digging up the cobalt. And the product, the cobalt ends up in these products that we use in medical equipment, in computers and smartphones. And like, yeah, like, hello, right?
I mean, who doesn't have one of these, right?
Nice.
Everybody watching and everybody listening probably has one of these.
But how do we rationalize, how can we rationalize ethically, morally, how can we rationalize doing this, using these products, knowing that there's a good chance the cobalt in my phone was dug up by one of these 11-year-old kids who probably is going to have an awful, hellish short life, right? Like, how do we rationalize this?
Right. It's very, very difficult to rationalize this sort of behavior. It's very difficult to rationalize living within this set of living arrangements, no matter what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if we turn off or even turn down industrial activity, we're going to cause the extinction of all life on Earth.
Quicker.
I'm not a big fan. So it's a classic paradox. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? I mean, you can continue living and try to pursue some version of joy and happiness and bring those to other people. Or you can turn your life around and say, I'm never using one of these screens again. I'm never using a vehicle again, on and on, right? There are literally thousands of things most of us do every week or every month that contribute to those child slaves in the Congo. Mm-hmm. And the only thing worse than continuing industrial activity is discontinuing industrial activity. We now know about the aerosol masking effect. We now know about nuclear facilities melting down, and they have horrible consequences. So what are you going to do, right? I mean, you could just be miserable all the time. I wouldn't recommend that. Yeah. And I know some people who just couldn't deal with it anymore, so they committed suicide. And that's not a way to go.
No. Well, like industrial civilization could continue without slavery, you know, like
Yes.
I think it's important that we at least speak out and say that's horrible, wrong thing happening to those children. I mean, maybe we could donate to Amnesty International. Maybe we could do any, like, I'm hoping some of my creative efforts, including this and others, will maybe reach the right person at some point and maybe have an impact. But it's all just hoping, in a way, my hopium, right? But
Well, I came up with the idea of planetary hospice, not just hospice for individuals, but planetary hospice. And this fits perfectly within this part of the conversation. And it's interesting because every time I'm interviewed or have a conversation with anybody or meet somebody on the street, I start talking and partner Pauline says, planetary hospice, mention planetary hospice. I'm mentioning it here. And in its simple form, I've written about this for Hubris, the monthly e-zine that I write for. And I've written about it on the blog frequently. So you can find more details there. But at the most rudimentary level, it's at the level of family and friends, the people you see that you work with every week. So you see your family members every day, you see the people you work with every week, maybe even every day. And how do you treat them? You treat them like you would treat your dying ancient grandmother, which means no lying, because she's not going to lie to you. And if you lied to her, she would catch it anyway. So no lying, tell her the full truth. Then the second level is the level of community, however that works for you. Maybe it's the people that show up at your block party or the people you see in your neighborhood, but not at the level of your entire city, for example. And those people you also treat like they're your dying ancient grandmother. And at that level, you attempt to work with your community to overcome the horrors of civilization, like racism and misogyny and homelessness, all those terrible things that afflict every civilization so far. Let's work to at least minimize those factors within our neighborhoods. And then at the level of society, what I proposed for a long time is, again, safely decommissioning those nuclear power plants, because they have the potential to destroy all life on Earth. And I don't think that's what most of us want to leave as our legacy.
So it's like minimizing, it's trying to reduce the effects of what is unfolding. It's like you can't change what is unfolding, but you can have small impact with the people around you, you know, maybe in distant lands in some way, I don't know. But
maybe you can stop it from happening in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
If you can stop it from happening in your neighborhood and it positively affects one person, then you've made a difference with your life. That's important to recognize, because so many of us think that we need to be Michael Jordan to have an impact. We don't. We need to have a positive impact on one person. We need to bring joy to one person in our lives, and that's a positive thing. And I really want people to keep that in mind, because so many people think that they're worthless, that they're not doing anything, that nobody knows who they are, they're not famous, and they can't get anything done. Really? Are you kidding me? How many people can have done that? How many people can any of us think of that have influenced our lives for our entire life? I mean, thinking back to the 63 years, who's had an impact on? There's not 30 people. There's not 20 people. There might only be 10. So if you become one of those people who has a positive impact on somebody's life, who brings them joy for however long a period of time, who lifts them out of homelessness, who points out that the regulations in my town addressing racism are horrible, and so we get that turned around. That's big. That's huge. We're not at the point anymore that we can save the world, whatever that means. But we are at the point where we can bring joy to specific individuals that we come across.
It's probably what people really want, unrealistically and idealistically. And I was for sure there when I first started talking to you. I was like, we got to solve the problem. Like, you know, like there's got to be a way, you know, that we can make this right, kind of thing, right? And I know sometimes people heavily believe in their religions because they think the man in the sky is going to solve everything and make everything right. I don't agree with that whatsoever. But even as individuals, like we think if we only work together in the right way, or we come up with the right technology, or if we just change our attitudes globally, then this can all be fixed. But I think that is that's in the realm of delusion as well.
Well,
you have to be.
I would argue that yes, it's in the realm of delusion, and we can also work toward those positive outcomes, even if we think that it's hopeless, right? Because at least then we have the ship pointed in the right direction, even if it's only for a short period of time, even if it only affects 3 people. That's still better than what is happening on a daily basis right now, most of the world.
Yeah, and if you look at this psychologically and emotionally, I think like you have to be willing to feel a certain level of sadness that like it's fairly. I feel so much sadness when I see those kids in the Congo, right? And I want to make it right. Like, what's that?
Yes, you better feel sadness.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a sick, deep, heart-wrenching kind of sadness, And these little kids were saying, "I just don't want to go back tomorrow. I just don't want to go back." Like, yeah, it's so sad. And so I mean, it's just going to continue. Those kids are going to live that life. And
we have in this country right now dozens of fast food restaurant chains and other chains that are violating child labor laws. And is this bad as what's going on in the Congo? No. Is it still bad? Yes. There's going to be a 14-year-old working until 2:00 in the morning on a school night at some place like McDonald's or Burger King, or fill in the blank with 30 others. And that's not a good thing. And that's the sort of thing that I would like to have people address if they're able, right? Go to the community meetings, talk about how last time you were at Burger King or Subway or McDonald's or whatever, and it was 11:00 at night on a Wednesday, you saw this 14-year-old working there. What is wrong with you people?
Yeah, point these things out.
This is a path to disaster for that kid. And you're contributing to it every time you go in there and buy a sandwich.
Yeah. And
so yes, we can all practice minimalism so that we try to at least minimize our impacts in the capitalist disaster that is obvious to anybody paying attention. And we can also do things at the community level. Will we succeed? Almost certainly not. But do you want to go to your grave thinking about those kids in the Congo and having done nothing, or the kid at McDonald's who you saw working at 1:00 in the morning, completely exhausted, and goes to school next day and gets in a fight because they don't even know what's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, like, to let go of grandiose ideas about having huge impact, and but also taking small actions where possible is probably the best we can offer, right? And to not severely beat ourselves up for living in a way that's all we've ever known. And even if we did en masse revolt against it, we would be worsening things for everybody, like you said, with the effect. What is it called? My mind is not registering. Aerosol. Thank you. Yeah. So there's some psychological gymnastics you have to do if you're going to be if you're not going to be you got to be careful that you don't beat yourself up too much, because people do this a lot. I see this, of course, and I think that's for sure, and it comes from a cultural context and from religion. We just get habitually into judging the crap out of ourselves for this, that, and everything. Nothing is ever good enough. You're never worthy, and so I think you got to get more conscious of that.
You don't need to beat yourself up. There's plenty of other people who are willing to do that for you.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. but people do it. And you know, if there's some tips and advice in the course that in my course could help you reduce that, at least, so that you're not weighed down by unnecessary self-judgment. And we also hurt ourselves when we're judging others too, by the way, just so you know. But because that fills us up with a bunch of toxic negative emotion that we don't need as well. Yeah.
Right. And almost everybody does that, and almost everybody joins in when other people are doing that. You know, we're trying to fit in at all costs. And that it's interesting. My partner just started substitute teaching in the local school system, and she sees all of this, what everybody recognizes in the entire society as bad behavior. She sees it every day. There are people who gossip all the time. That's all they do, is talk badly about their other coworkers.
Yeah.
So and so does this.
Judge.
What the hell?
Yeah.
We know better than that, people.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, I see it all the time too, and even where I would hope not to see it, and even insensitivity towards mental health, where I would hope I wouldn't see it, I still see it. Yeah, it's just these patterns of judgment. It's really good to become aware of how much we judge, and there you can reduce it. You don't have to be stuck in that paradigm, because it is a very toxic one.
Yeah, you know, everybody acknowledges that they make mistakes, right? But we tend to forget them fairly quickly. And I made this horrendous, terrible mistake when I started living off grid, that at the time, I thought it wasn't a mistake at all. I thought it was leading by example. And I would guess that everybody watching this has at some point in their lives decided, I'm going to do this thing. And then, as it turns out, 2 weeks later, 2 months later, 2 years later, it was a terrible thing to do. We all do those things. Let's not beat ourselves up about them.
Yeah, that's why the whole concept of sin is a joke, because the whole thing, there is no sinning. There is only learning, in my opinion. You learn by experience, and you know, you figure out what works, what serves your interests, and what keeps you alive, and what keeps your relationships alive, hopefully. But it's not like you're sinning if you don't know in the first place exactly how everything works. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right.
And you know, yeah,
we all have the potential for regret. We've all done some things that and I love what Edward Abbey says, or wrote many years ago. Edward Abbey, the Southwestern American writer and public speaker. Life is too short for regret. No, actually, he said life is too short for grief or regret or bullshit. 3 different sentences there. And yes, you know, we could spend a lot of time beating ourselves up for a mistake we made. And trust me, I've done that for thousands of hours. And I think every day that I'm done now. I'm not going to do that anymore.
And then with this topic, I mean, I guess I would just say, in addition, is to be careful not to be beating yourself up for being locked in this way of living arrangements, you know, or that you don't know any other way to live, so you have to keep doing it, and it is harmful. But yeah, if we live our lives in a state of shame about that, that's going to destroy us. And all of this, I think, is so much easier said than done. Like giving advice, like anytime I give mental health advice, I'm always like, I don't do this perfectly, by the way. This is all so much easier said than done. Yes, I still beat myself up at times. Yes, I still fall into toxic patterns here and there. It's just you have to get into some practices and some lifestyle changes so that you can reduce that as much as possible. Yeah, so it's so much easier for us to say, don't judge yourself, but it's like, yeah, you can't just like snap. It's just like saying, don't be depressed. Like, you need to get into some practices. You need to get into some good practices to reduce that. Yeah, just to say things realistically here.
Right. It's like when you're 12 years old and you're playing Little League baseball, right? And you know that the goal is to get a hit. You're going up to the plate, you know the goal, but you can't kick yourself every time you don't. The best hitters in Major League Baseball strive for getting a hit 1 out of 3 times. That's phenomenal if you can bat 333 for a season. Are you kidding? One person in the history of the sport has gotten a hit 4 out of 10 times. One, Ted Williams, a long time ago.
Wow. Yeah.
So, you know, you can't do the amazing, phenomenal thing every time. You just can't. 99% of the day, we're just struggling to get through the day. Make sure that we have enough food on the table, enough water to drink, and enough sleep at night that we can get up and do it again.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is, like, I said this to a guy yesterday at work. I said, you know, life is hard. People get sick. We lose people. Catastrophic events, unexpected, you know, and numerous life stresses. So life is hard, right? But we don't have to make it harder than it needs to be. So like,
Right.
the things you can learn, like in mental health, is hopefully to reduce or get rid of those harder than it needs to be. And it's usually in relationships, and with relationship with yourself and with others. That's the harder than it needs to be, that we can cut that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, from a line from Roddy Piper playing the lead in the 1988 film They Live. Yeah, the line, "Life's a bitch and she's in heat again." You know, life is hard. It is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we can bring a smile to somebody's face every now and then, if we can bring a smile to our face every now and then, that's clearly in the category of #winning. I mean, life is hard.
And speaking of smile, I was is it okay if I share my musical adventure?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So me and a couple of guys are doing a music project. Me and a couple of fellow Canadians, one in Southern Lethbridge and another guy in Ontario. And yeah, we're doing some punk pop music. And of course, you can access it for free. It's on YouTube right now, and it'll be elsewhere as well. But the band is called Lie Avenger. And it's fun punk rock music.
And is it all one word on YouTube? Remind me. Lie Avenger, or is it 2 words?
I think it's 2. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of the songs are going to sort of be following the themes of things I've talked about with Guy, about, you know, just general frustration and angst about, you know, what we're all going through, and all the lies that we have to somehow figure out how to deal with, that are heaped onto us through the systems that we participate in. And yeah, so it'll be kind of in there. And if you're into that kind of that style of music, I think it's pretty catchy. I write the majority of the songs. Yeah, and other than that, yeah, it's a way of it's another way for me to try and cope and get through life. We all need our coping mechanisms, and I guess music is a classic way of doing that, right? Coping, expressing, screaming, swearing, so on.
Absolutely. And not only that, that's a classic example of living a whole life, trying to do something other than your work every day, all day. Right? And so I thought it was great. And you sent that song. And it's interesting because Pauline and I have 4 people stayed in the house the last couple of nights because we went to a concert. Her daughter opens for Pauline's daughter opens as the lead of the band Locate S1. You can find them on YouTube. And they open for the band of Montreal, who is the founder and lead singer is Pauline's daughter's fiance. Whew. So we 6 of us went to a concert in Greenfield, Massachusetts, only about an hour from here. And so they all stayed overnight, right? We had this slumber party, and we watched your music last night and thought it was awesome. So there you have the ringing endorsement from 6 middle-aged people.
Right on. Well, I kind of feel funny because I'm 48 now, and I'm saying we're going to be the best seniors punk band in all of Alberta.
It's interesting. When I turned 30, was it when I turned 30? Yes. I was going to an HMO. I turned 30. Now, my dad shattered the McPherson male longevity record when he turned 60. He became the oldest male McPherson ever when he turned 60, right? And so when I turned 30, I thought I was middle-aged. So I went to see my medical doctor at the HMO, because that's all that we had at the time. And this guy must have been 70, 75 years old. And he got called out of retirement because they couldn't find anybody else to serve as a doctor there. And he asked, what are you doing? What are you doing here? Why'd you come see me today? And I said, well, I'm middle-aged, so I thought it was just some sort of overall checkup. And he says, how old are you? I said, I just turned 30 like a week ago. And he says, you're not middle-aged. Middle-aged is my age plus 10 years. It always has been, it always will be. You get out of here. That was hilarious.
Oh, yeah. I think middle age, you start to feel, when you're hitting middle age. The body starts to take a little bit of a slow decline, I think. But yeah.
Well, I spoke on the telephone with one of my former graduate advisees, and she said, I really miss my 40s. I'm like, I don't even remember my 40s.
Oh man, because you're scaring me, because I've felt some discomforts in my 40s now. I'm afraid of the 50s.
Right.
But,
well, and it was really bizarre because I remember this person from when she was so young, right? People, when we would go to a restaurant together or when we were at a meeting together, people thought she was my daughter. And she says, I turned 50 a few weeks ago. I really miss my 40s. And I'm like 63 years old, and you got nothing to complain about.
Yeah. It's hard not to turn on them. appreciate what you have. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, life's hard.
It is. And I guess, yeah, so if we can make it meaningful along the way with our various activities and small tokens of things we do, that can make a difference. But here we go again, right? Offering all this advice.
Well, and finding meaning in your life is I think something we have done individually, and that finding meaning goes beyond the work we do, the thing we get paid for. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable to suggest to people a reason to live, to find some meaning in your life beyond yourself. This set of living arrangements is all about finding meaning in shopping. How many thousand times have I heard shop till you drop? Right? As if that's some sort of goal, as if that's a virtue.
Who said it? If you have a why, I think it's Nietzsche. If you have a why, you can endure almost any how.
Well, it's interesting because I did a little research on that. A lot of people think it was Nietzsche. A lot of people think it was
Viktor Frankl.
Right, Viktor Frankl. But it was Gordon Allport who wrote the foreword for Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, okay.
And so I actually did the research. I found my copy of Man's Search for Meaning. There it is right there, Gordon Allport.
Cool.
Who was a professor at, I don't remember, Princeton maybe. Anyway, so it's brilliant advice, no matter who said it, right? If you can find a why, you can put up with almost any how to get you there. But finding a reason for your own life, even if it's to bring joy to two other people in your entire 60 or 65 or 95 years that you live, I'd say that's enough. Because so many people spend time focusing strictly on themselves and bringing me happiness by buying things or eating things or whatever. I've never felt happier than when I brought joy to somebody else.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, finding a concrete way to do that, right, is whatever avenue you want to take. And maybe that's why people will always endorse their religions as well, because they're like, it gives my life meaning. And I think it's sort of a pseudo meaning. I think you can do much more direct things to help people in your community rather than attending church and paying a tithe. But anyway, here I go again with the criticism of own religion. But I mean, when I was developing my course, it got me through a lot of hard days in my life, because because I was like, even if I can just reach, 100 people with this course, or, even smaller, whatever, like where someone doesn't have to endure the hell and the hardships that goes with that disorder, that would make it kind of like worth it,
Right. And I think we could wrap up with that, with that little conversation we just had about why and how we live, and providing that little summary. I think that's a good place to stop for today. We'll pick it up again next week.
Sounds awesome.
Okay, and can you make a pitch one more time for your course?
Oh,
and
okay,
also
yeah.
for your YouTube channel.
Okay, the course is for mental health and borderline personality disorder, and is applicable to anyone interested in learning about those things for better relationships and better emotional health, all around. The website is freebpdcourse.com, and it's a combination of sort of a exploration of my experiences, how I learned all about how to deal with BPD. There's over 100 videos linked to each lesson, like throughout the whole course, that supplements the things that I explain into things how I try to understand it. So it can be pretty expansive and there's lots of tools in there, free resources. Like I have 50 free mental health apps that I found. There's a link to a podcast that I used to do with there's 45 episodes in there that you can listen to. So it's just packed full. Anyway, so please do check it out. And if it does help you in any way, please let me know, because that's what really makes life meaningful for me. And then the musical endeavor is called Lie Avenger, and it's a punk pop music trio. We just put out our first single yesterday, and yeah, this isn't about me trying to get famous. It's about just trying to share my creative works. It's free. You can access it on YouTube, but it'll be available at the other streaming networks as well. And lots of the music is going to align with these conversations and this topic area. Lots of the songs. Did I say conversations? Lots of the songs.
So in order, that's freebpdcourse.com.
Yes.
And Lie Avenger on YouTube.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Look forward to our next conversation.
You bet.